3 weeks ago, I pulled 225 pounds off the floor. Clean, no belt, no straps. I am 64 years old and I have not touched a creatine supplement in 8 months. The only thing I changed was a 43-cent food I started keeping in my refrigerator, and I want to tell you exactly what it is and exactly why it works better than anything I ever bought in a tub. 12 months ago, I would have called that impossible. I had been using powdered creatine on and off for 9 years, and I had convinced myself that the powder was the only option that worked. I thought whole foods were too slow, too inconsistent. I thought the supplement was the science, and everything else was guesswork. What I actually found out is that the men who built and preserved serious muscle through the 1930s, 1940s, and 1950s were loading creatine every single day without knowing the word creatine existed. They were doing it from tin cans and butcher barrels for pennies a serving. And researchers at McMaster University have now confirmed that whole food creatine sources deliver something isolated powder cannot match because of the biological cofactors that arrive in the same bite. By the end of this video, I am going to give you the complete picture, including one specific food that I found in a 1944 U.S. Army field nutrition document that delivers more creatine per serving than a standard powder scoop, while simultaneously solving the absorption problem that makes powder work poorly in men over 60. This applies if you have not trained seriously in years. It applies if you are already on heart medication. It especially applies if you tried creatine powder before and felt nothing, because there is a specific biological reason that happens to older men, and the food I am about to show you addresses it directly. Before we get started, I want to ask you one thing. What cheap, everyday food do you remember from your childhood that seemed to keep everyone around you strong without anyone trying? Leave it in the comments. I read every single one personally. The first thing I had to understand when I started researching this was what creatine actually does in an aging body, because most of the information out there is written for 25-year-olds trying to add weight to their bench press. That is not the right frame for a man over 60. Creatine is not a gym supplement. It is a cellular energy currency. Your muscles store it as phosphocreatine, and they draw on that reserve anytime they need rapid ATP regeneration. Standing up from a chair, catching yourself on a staircase, carrying something heavy across the room. Every one of those movements draws on your phosphocreatine reserve before anything else. When that reserve is low, your muscles respond more slowly, fatigue faster, and recover more poorly after any exertion. Researchers at McMaster University studied creatine supplementation in adults over 65 and found significant improvements in muscle strength, lean mass, and functional task performance compared to placebo, with the most pronounced gains appearing in lower body power. Lower body power is the exact physical capacity that determines fall risk in older adults. This is not a bodybuilding nutrient. It is a functional independence nutrient. But here is the problem with powder that nobody in the supplement industry will explain to you clearly. Creatine absorption into muscle cells depends on two things working correctly: adequate insulin sensitivity to drive cellular uptake, and sufficient intracellular hydration to retain phosphocreatine once it enters the cell. Both of those mechanisms decline with age. A 25-year-old can take a scoop of creatine monohydrate and load efficiently. A 64-year-old with moderate insulin resistance and lower cellular hydration takes the same scoop, and a significant portion of it passes through without loading properly. That is why millions of men over 50 have tried creatine powder and felt nothing. The delivery system failed, not the molecule. The molecule is real, the vehicle was wrong. Therefore, the question I kept coming back to was this: how did men in 1943 maintain the physical output they maintained without any of this? The answer was in the food, specifically in the cofactors that arrive alongside creatine in whole food sources and that never appear in an isolated powder. And the clearest example of that difference starts with the cheapest canned protein in American history. Wild-caught sardines packed in water were the universal protein food of working Americans during the Depression and through the Second World War. A tin cost a few pennies. It required no cooking, no refrigeration until opened, and could be eaten standing over a kitchen counter in 30 seconds. Men who spent 12-hour days doing physical labor that would destroy a modern adult ate sardines regularly, not because they understood the biochemistry, but because the food was there and it kept them going. We now understand exactly why. Wild-caught sardines contain approximately 4.5 grams of creatine per kilogram of raw flesh. That is already competitive with most retail beef cuts. But the creatine content is not the story. The story is what sardines carry alongside it. Omega-3 fatty acids in the form of EPA and DHA, taurine at one of the highest concentrations found in any commonly available food, vitamin D at roughly 12 micrograms per tin, selenium, calcium, all in one package. And that combination solves the absorption problem that makes powder fail in older men. The omega-3 fatty acids in sardines directly improve insulin-mediated creatine transport into muscle cells by enhancing the expression of a glucose transporter called GLUT4. This is the same mechanism that researchers discovered when studying why fish oil amplifies creatine powder efficacy when the two are taken together as separate supplements. In a sardine tin, that amplification is built directly into the food itself. You are not taking two supplements and hoping they interact correctly. You are eating a single food where the fat improves the uptake of the creatine in the same bite. It is a self-amplifying creatine source. A landmark meta-analysis from the University of Exeter confirmed that combined omega-3 and creatine intake produced significantly greater gains in muscle mass and functional strength in older adults than creatine alone. The whole food sardine matrix was identified as mechanistically superior to isolated powder in every measurable dimension tested. Add the taurine. Creatine retention inside a muscle cell depends on intracellular hydration, which is regulated by taurine-driven osmotic balance. Without adequate taurine inside the cell membrane, phosphocreatine loads and leaks back out. Sardines deliver taurine and creatine simultaneously, which means the retention problem that makes powder inefficient in older men is addressed in the same tin. 1 tin of wild-caught sardines in water. Drain it. Add lemon and black pepper. Eat it with whole grain crackers or overgreens. That is the entry point. Under 90 cents. Under 90 seconds of preparation. If you do nothing else from this video, start with 1 tin 4 days a week and build from there. But sardines only address part of the muscle preservation picture, because there is another creatine-dense food that was sitting in the butcher case of every American neighborhood store from the 1930s through the 1960s that has almost completely disappeared from modern eating habits, and that does something no fish can do. I want to be honest with you about something here. I avoided this food for 2 years before I tried it. I had a reason that I now understand was based on misinformation, and I want to address that before you form the same objection I had. So stay with me for 60 seconds. Beef heart. During the Depression and through the Second World War, whole animal butchery was not a culinary philosophy. It was economic necessity. Nothing was wasted. Beef heart was a weekly staple in millions of American households, braised slowly with onions and served over potatoes. It was cheap. It was available. And the men who ate it had no idea they were consuming the single most creatine-dense organ meat available at approximately 2.5 grams of creatine per 100 grams of serving weight. But the creatine is still not the headline. The headline is CoQ10. Cardiac muscle tissue must sustain constant, uninterrupted ATP regeneration across an entire lifetime. Because of that demand, the heart self-concentrates both phosphocreatine and CoQ10 at levels that far exceed any skeletal muscle cut you will find at a retail butcher. When you eat beef heart, you receive the phosphocreatine substrate for muscle energy alongside the mitochondrial cofactor that converts that substrate into usable ATP at the cellular level. These two compounds work together in the cell. Consuming them separately from different sources produces a weaker combined effect than consuming them together in the food that evolved to contain both. Here is why that specific combination matters for the man watching this video right now. CDC data shows that approximately 56% of adults over 65 in the United States are on statin medications. Statins block the mevalonate pathway that synthesizes CoQ10 in your body. The depletion is real, documented, and rarely discussed during the prescription conversation. Most men on statins have a functional energy deficit in both cardiac and skeletal muscle that they attribute to aging, when part of it is directly pharmaceutical in origin. Beef heart replenishes both depleted compounds simultaneously. 100 grams costs between 50 and 80 cents at most butchers. Ask for it specifically because it is rarely displayed on the counter. Slice it thin, sear it in a hot pan with olive oil for 3 minutes per side, and serve it like any lean steak. If you are on a statin and you have been losing muscle and energy steadily, this is the food I want you to try first. I want to stop here and speak to a specific person, because I know exactly who is still watching at this point in the video. You are probably somewhere between 58 and 72. You have been losing strength for a few years, maybe more. You have tried things that did not work, and you have gotten quieter about it, because nothing you have tried has produced a result you could point to and say, that was real. You might be on a blood pressure medication or a statin, and you have a voice in the back of your head that says your muscle loss is too far along for any of this to matter. When I first understood what dietary creatine was actually doing in the body, the first thing I thought about was my own situation. 62 years old, down 21 pounds of lean mass from my peak, waking up stiff, struggling through afternoon energy crashes that had been running my life for 4 years. I was not looking for transformation. I was looking for the bleeding to stop. The thing I want you to start tonight requires nothing beyond what is already in your kitchen. If you have any canned fish in your cabinet right now, whether it is sardines, tuna, or salmon, eat one serving before you go to bed. That is it, not as a complete solution. As a signal to your body that the raw material is coming. The first thing I noticed in the early weeks was that the afternoon crashes started to compress. They did not disappear immediately, but they shortened. I would hit the wall at 3 and feel functional again by 3:30 instead of by 5. That 2-hour window coming back is not a small thing when you have lost it for years. I kept going and started paying attention to what else was shifting. But the food I want to tell you about next was the one I genuinely did not expect, because I found it in a source that nobody is looking at for nutrition information. In the summer of 1944, the United States Army Quartermaster Corps published a field ration analysis document cataloging the nutritional density of preserved protein foods available for field deployment. The document was written by a researcher named Dr. Russell Wilder at the Mayo Clinic, who was serving as a nutrition consultant to the Army at the time. The document compared fresh, canned, and preserved meat sources across protein density, fat profile, and what Wilder called sustained energy yield, which was his pre-biochemical term for what we now understand as phosphocreatine availability. Pickled herring appeared at the top of the preserved fish category, with a notation that it produced greater sustained physical output per calorie than any other preserved protein source tested. Wilder noted it, but the document moved on to logistics. Nobody followed up on why. That document sat in Army historical archives until I found a reference to it in a footnote of a 1967 sports nutrition textbook that was part of a collection at a university library I was searching through digital records from. The why is now visible in the research. Herring contains between 6.5 and 10 grams of creatine per kilogram of raw flesh. That is the highest concentration found in any commonly available fish. A single 2 tablespoon serving of pickled herring delivers creatine on par with a standard 3 to 5 gram powder scoop. The pickling process preserves creatine content almost entirely because brine and vinegar do not degrade the guanidino group the way high cooking heat does. You are getting maximum creatine yield from minimum thermal damage. The men eating pickled herring from barrels in 1932 were creatine-loading for a penny, a serving without any awareness that the molecule existed. Depression-era general stores along the eastern seaboard and in the Scandinavian immigrant communities of the Midwest kept wooden barrels of pickled herring near the entrance. Working men bought it by the ladle. They ate it with rye bread and black coffee and went back to work. Their muscles were receiving one of the most complete creatine plus cofactor packages available in any food on the planet, alongside taurine, omega, 3S, selenium, and vitamin B12, all of which support the absorption and retention mechanisms that make creatine function properly in aging tissue. Keep a jar in your refrigerator. 2 tablespoons with rye crackers at lunch. 10 cents a serving from bulk, canned, or jarred sources at any grocery store with a Scandinavian or Eastern European food section. But there is one more food on this list, and it is the one that surprised me most when I traced the history, because it was not a coastal food or an immigrant community staple. It was a rural American survival food that disappeared from the mainstream diet at exactly the same time that the testosterone research. In 1953, a USDA researcher named Dr. Henry C. Sherman published a dietary analysis correlating food preparation habits with vitality scores in adult men across a rural Midwestern cohort. The data showed that the highest vitality men in the sample had one dietary habit that was statistically distinct from all other groups. They consumed a combination of at least 3 seed types daily, rather than rotating individual seeds. Sherman did not know why the combination mattered. He noted it, published it in the USDA Agricultural Research Bulletin from October of that year, and moved on to other work. The bulletin was never digitized. I found it in a microfilm archive reference in a footnote of a 1971 nutrition textbook, which I found because I went looking through pre-pharmaceutical era dietary literature with a specific question in mind. The reason the combination works better than any individual seed is now visible in the research. Watermelon seeds correct the mineral deficiency at the manufacturing level. Whole flax seeds address the aromatase conversion problem. Fenugreek activates the cellular transport mechanism that loads the manufacturing process. Pumpkin seeds repair the command chain that initiates everything. Each seed is addressing a different point of failure in the same system. Run all four together and you are not taking a supplement. You are restoring the complete operational chain that allowed men in 1952 to maintain strong hormone profiles into their late 60s without ever visiting an endocrinologist. 1 handful of watermelon seeds in the afternoon, 1 tablespoon of whole soaked flax seeds in the morning, 1 cup of fenugreek tea before breakfast, 1 ounce of lightly dry roasted pumpkin seeds in the evening. The entire daily protocol costs under 50 cents. It requires nothing beyond a dry pan, a jar of water, and a baking sheet. The men who maintained this without knowing why it worked had it right by accident. Now we know exactly why it works. I spent over $4,000 on testosterone support products between the ages of 54 and 61. I have a shelf in my garage with the evidence. Not one of those products addressed the command chain. Not one of them worked on all 4 points of failure simultaneously. The answer was in Sherman's 1953 bulletin the whole time, in USDA archives that nobody was looking at, because there was no financial incentive for anyone to look. If you want to see exactly how I structured this 4-seed protocol into a complete daily routine, alongside the other 2 dietary changes I made in the same period, I put everything together in one place. I call it the Aging Fixed Strength System. Nothing complicated, just the exact steps I wish I had followed 10 years earlier. You can check it out below. Now, I want a specific answer from you in the comments. Which of these 4 seeds were you already eating without knowing what they were doing for your hormones? Tell me which one and tell me your age. I reply to every comment personally, and I want to know where you are starting from. If this changed how you think about what is actually driving your hormonal decline, subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. The next video covers a single morning habit that was near universal among American men in the 1940s, has almost completely disappeared today, and that research from the University of Texas Medical Branch shows has a measurable, suppressive effect on morning cortisol levels in men over 60. Cortisol is the primary chemical signal that shuts down the HPG axis we talked about today. That video will make this one make even more sense. Stay moving. I will see you there.